Sorry. So hopefully everybody can see that. Just on behalf of Danielle and myself, I'd like to thank you for taking time out of your evening. What we're going to do here is a little bit of a combination of going through, just setting this in context. I'll start off with that. Danielle is then going to run through the screening that you did and the reason why we did that, and probably set it in context of some of the work that she's done as part of her PhD, and look at it compared to, let's say, for example, the wider sporting population in terms of female athletes in Ireland as well. And then we'll finish off with just maybe setting this in context of a case study, just to show you how this can all fit together. And I suppose, you know, this is not a new topic now. It's been, you know, gaining traction for the last couple of years, but you know, it's certainly something that I've seen quite a lot of in my career, and I think things can be done better. That's what I would say, and it's done relative to injury risk and getting sick, and that would be the kind of key context that we're looking at it, because obviously if we can keep those you know, at bay, then our performances is going to be a lot better and a lot more consistent, and that's what we're looking for as well. So from our point of view in terms of performance nutrition, really we're looking at the short term obviously, but we also have a long term in our scopes as well. But we want you to be able to train and compete as well as possible, and to give you enough nutrients for daily life. And actually, from my point of view, when I look quite often at food diaries, what I do see is that these food diaries are very nutrient rich. So there's lots of vitamins, lots of minerals, lots of variety. But the one thing that sometimes they're not enough of is energy or calories. And we'll come back to that in a little while. It can mean different things to different people, depending on what your requirements are, what your current training status is, your underlying medical conditions and tolerances and stuff like that. And I think it's very important to look at your training week and really periodize your food intake to match what your output is on any given day or any period of time within that as well. And looking at what you guys want in terms of athletes and coaches, well, obviously injury and illness is a no-no. Nobody wants that. You want to be able to perform, you want to get your training adaptation, and you want that competition performance as well. So we want to be able to do that without the risk of injury and illness. But why do we think navigation of this is so difficult? You know, a lot of people would say, oh, it should be easy enough. But it is tricky, because the problem is we're actually getting involved in lots of different facts, fiction, all sorts of, you know, thoughts and ideas, maybe centered around people's own experiences or N=1. That's fine. But I think we need to be really careful, because that can affect us. And there's so much stuff out there. You know, this one does the rounds every now and again, that you can't really eat at night because that would affect body composition. You know, protein's important for muscle building, not necessarily if you don't have enough calories overall in there. Yeah, carbs are definitely evil for some athletes. Natural is safe. Again, a lot of companies and different bits and pieces will use natural to set maybe to sell something to you. Yeah, again, I hate words such as clean and dirty. You know, I'm literally just off a call with an athlete, you know, who proceeds to tell me that, you know, they really feel guilty because they ate a lot of chocolate and that's not clean. It's not going to poison them, but one of the difficulties is that when we start to label foods in how we feel about them, it actually has a knock-on effect in terms of our mindset, and that then can, you know, make things much more difficult. So this particular athlete, what happens is, and it happens every week religiously nearly, is that, you know, she ends up been really tired and fatigued at the weekend because she has restricted quite significantly what she's eating. She then becomes tired. It's less likely that she's able to her resilience is a whole load of chocolate on a Saturday evening and Sunday. She feels guilty, and then come Monday, we're back to the same thing again. So, and that doesn't work, and it's not working for her at the moment. So this is where we're sitting here, and then what I'd like to do is maybe hand over to Danielle to have a look at what the nutritional considerations is and how we lead into this REDS piece as well. So I'll hand over. You just tell me when you want to switch the slides, Danielle.
Brilliant, Sharon. So I suppose whenever we're considering different components of nutrition and you sit down with an athlete, athletes will discuss the diets, the magic bullet supplements, and then body weight may be an issue as well if they think it's going to confer some sort of advantage to their performance. But what they really should be focusing on here is the bottom of the food pyramid, having enough energy and getting the right mix of macro and micronutrients available. So that's from a macro perspective, weekly and monthly. And then from a micro perspective, you should be looking at the timing of these foods and around your training sessions and the availability then of energy, protein and carbohydrates. Yeah.
Do you want me to change?
Yeah, please.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
You're grand. So then other nutritional considerations.
Are you there, Danielle?
Can you hear me? Yeah.
I might have to take over. Hello?
Hello.
We can hear it. I think it must be your end, Sharon. I think we can hear it.
Can't hear you. Okay, well, I might as well take over then. So basically, in terms of nutritional considerations, different sports have different training demands. So even if you think within athletics, you know, your marathon runners versus your sprinters is obviously going to be very different. And even within that group then, different athletes have different requirements as well. So one size does not fit all. And I think it's really important to be mindful of that because it can be different at different scenarios during a training training or competition or whatever as well. So basically individual preferences and tolerances is really important, and we might touch on that a little bit later on because one of the questions we look towards is around that gut function and gut health, and quite often a lot of athletes do present with situations such as bloating or wind or pain, and it may be that certain foods actually can exacerbate that a little bit as well. So it's not necessarily that there's an intolerance or an allergy there, but there can actually be difficulties at certain times as well. Some people may have actual well-defined clinical allergies, and some of the common ones there are nuts, lactose, gluten tends to be that maybe for celiacs, or as I said, we'll talk about that in terms of the IBS. And obviously then we look at things like travel, where you need to make sure you're well planned either for inside the country or if traveling outside the country, and then what your access is to certain foods, what are the limitations, what's the climate, because that could affect your intakes as well. So the amount of energy that you need is the fuel that your body needs after you take out the calories that you require for exercise. So this idea is that, you know, people have calculated out, oh, well, I've used up, let's say, for example, 2,000 calories today or 2,500, therefore I consume that amount. You have to remember that there has to be some left over to ensure that the underlying physiological requirements are met as well, because that can otherwise lead to problems in the longer term. And it's interesting because this bucket type scenario came from probably a long time ago, when a lot of athletes that I would have worked with potentially may have indicated or presented with iron deficiency anemia. And some of the coaches or the athletes' first port of call was, well, I need to get an iron infusion because, you know, my iron levels aren't very good. Well, the question you have to ask yourself is, why is that the case? Why are my iron levels not good? Not because if you give an iron infusion and you don't deal with what the problem is, you're going to come back to the same problem again down the line. So you need to understand that iron is one of those ones that we certainly would look, that if there's problems with that, it could be a red flag for other things as well. So again, then you end up the situation where there is low energy availability, so there's not enough energy for normal bodily functions. So some of the reasons behind that is that it's quite normal, textbook actually, that if you do high intensity exercise, it can affect your appetite. It can make you feel nauseous, and it certainly can then have a knock-on effect, not only on recovery directly after that particular session, but also on the overall ability to meet the requirements for the day as well. There may be increased energy expenditure due to your high intensity exercise, but no increases in hunger or energy intake for a period of time after that as well. Lack of time quite often is a major issue for some people, because on your busier days or your days with your higher load, you more than likely are doing other things as well. So the day, goes on, and therefore you actually start to run out of time as well. The low energy density, this is something that we definitely do see. So it's that concept that, there's a big plate of food there, but it is very much around salads, colour. There's high nutrients there, no problem at all, but there's not a huge amount of calories. And that's significantly an issue. For example, if you do a session that's maybe costing you somewhere in the region of 800, 1,000 calories, and you come in and you have a meal that gives you back 400 or 500 of those calories, you're still in deficit, and you're going into the next session in deficit as well. Dieting, or again, that weight category element of things, maybe people trying to get to a weight, and that's where that racing weight bit comes in. So it's important that if there is a discussion around that racing weight is exactly for that. It's not something that should be done for long periods of time. You need to taper and look at that in the big scheme of your annual plan, and really make sure that if you do try to achieve a weight that's maybe much lower than it should be, that you look to bring that back up as soon as possible again for a period of time before you would bring that down again. And then some people do fall within what we call a disordered eating spectrums. Anything from just, the fact that they may have to, there may be likes, dislikes, we may be excluding certain food groups, right up to some of the clinical conditions such as anorexia nervosa. So, this is not something that's new. We've seen this in athletes through a number of publications now. Again, if we look at Danielle's work that was published, where we'll talk about that in a minute, 48% of athletes were presenting with low energy availability. So there's a range of different sports, and you can see anything from up to 52% of track and field athletes. And again, your endurance athletes, you're much more likely to get more of that as well. And in males, there's not as much work done, but it is prevalent there too. So what are some of the health consequences that are linked with the low energy availability, which is what we're really interested in making sure we avoid as much as possible? So a lot of you will know about the female athlete triad. So again, probably centered around lack of menstrual function, maybe some involvement then with bone health, and probably potentially there's some disordered eating patterns there as well. The bone bit is really important, because it is very, very important that we maximize your bone mass as much as possible, at this age, particularly those that are still under 23, and certainly the older athletes here as well. There's still opportunities to maximize that bone health as well. So peak bone mass is the highest bone mass that you will achieve, and really it's probably achieved by the age of about 30. And what I think the process that I would see it as akin to is that you're constantly paying into your bone pension, because come the age of 40 plus, you're probably starting to withdraw from that bone pension as well. And that's in the presence of everything being okay. And I'm talking about the female sex hormones there as one of the most important predictors of how this will look down the line. So it's really definitely we need to look at calcium intakes, and really important to look at that, especially if periods are missing. We need to make sure that calcium intake is very good. Sometimes athletes will report that intakes aren't as good, and a question that I would ask you is that if you don't consume dairy, where are you actually getting your calcium from? And a lot of people think that if they switch over from, let's say, dairy to some of the non-dairy milk alternatives, like oat or almond or soy, that it'll probably give them the same thing. That's not necessarily the case. So don't see it as a like-for-like switch, particularly when it comes to calcium. Make sure that they're well-fortified varieties, and you're certainly not going to get the same carbohydrate or protein profile as you would do with the dairy option as well. People think green leafy veg, that's a good, yes, it's a source. The amount that you need to consume relative to a piece of cheese or a glass of milk is massive. So again, what that does is it fills you up, but it doesn't necessarily give you the calories that you need. So this is really important, where we're starting to see nutrient dense but energy poor as well. So if you're emitting things like milk and dairy products, then you need to make sure then that we are getting it from other sources as well. And again, if you are going to supplement, make sure that you don't over egg it in terms of taking high amounts of calcium supplements. And again, the advice would be that you split that into 2 doses of probably around about 500 milligrams per day, rather than taking the calcium supplement all at once, because absorption of a bigger bolus of calcium isn't as good. So some of the other ones obviously then is, so what we tend to see in athletes that are presenting with low energy availabilities, we might look to a blood test, and sometimes cholesterol levels are elevated. Sometimes we get decreases in blood pressure. We can have low fasting blood glucose levels. And then what we also see is the resting RMR is also affected as well. And again, part of the reason of that is it's the metabolic response to not enough coming in. We're starting to see effects on some of the metabolism. The metabolism is starting to slow down to meet the fact that there's not enough going in. And then you also can see changes, for example, in thyroid function. So we get abnormalities in thyroid function tests. So this idea that there's all these athletes running around with dodgy thyroids, it's nothing in the main. A lot of it is to do with this. So we start to see changes in menstrual function as well. So either it becomes that it starts to move out in terms of length of days. It could go to from 28 days or 30 days out to 60 days. And again, you might see this with an increase in load or an increase in competition schedule as well, or actually it starts to disappear for 2 or 3 months at a time. So that's important too. That is a red flag there too. And then because of the menstrual dysfunction, we know that the reason for that is because the female sex hormones are starting to be affected, and then this has a knock-on effect then on bone mineral density, because they are really protective of your bones. So when we start to see estrogen and progesterone being affected, that then has a knock-on effect. And that combined potentially with not enough calcium and not enough protein really can exacerbate the problems as well. So you can start to see why then there potentially is a risk of sickness and injury as well. And it sits really very much, if you look at the triangle here, where obviously that female athlete triad, you know, it's quite defined to this particular, those 3 points, but you can see the wider aspects of REDS as much, you know, people might present with, you know, gastrointestinal problems, they may have some blood issues, there's definitely starting to notice that they're picking up more colds, and then we start to see changes in performance. The interesting thing I would say, and this is something that you need to be really mindful about as well, is that just before this happens, just before you start to see some of this, actually what can happen is that there has been a significant change potentially in weight. It may have dropped down. Performances start to improve quite significantly, but it's how you maintain that in the long term. So if your performances, if your speeds have gone up quite significantly and it's still all is going okay, just be careful, because if there are any of these red flags that have been flagging for you, you need to be really careful and ask yourself, am I going to be able to sustain this? Am I trying to do this for such a long period of time? And really just keep a check. It's really, really important to keep a check, because we need to be able to keep this going in the longer term as well. So it's not just a simple diagnosis. It's really, really tricky sometimes to be able to put that in context for every individual. But for me, I think, we're looking at lots of different things. And one of the things that we would be looking to potentially do with people in the Institute is looking at RMR as an assessment that can help us, pinpoint maybe where there's changes, and also look to see if we can adapt or change things, whether or not that improves that. And what we're looking at is a ratio, and this ratio of less than 0.90 has been widely used as a kind of a marker where there might be issues with energy deficiency in females. So it may be that we could do this test over a number of times, and just give people a baseline and look to put it in. We're not saying that it's a gold standard, but we're saying that alongside some other tests, it might give us some more, I suppose, a little bit bigger context to try and help people, along this road in terms of helping them help manage energy availability issues. So the reason that we got you to fill in the LEAF questionnaire is that it has been used quite successfully as a screening tool to identify risk, particularly in females, for female athlete triad and for REDS. And this goes back to work that was done by Anna Meelan and published in the BMJ, or British Journal of Sports Medicine, back in 2014. And it has been used quite successfully in other athlete groups, to identify and to screen. And the whole idea about screening is that you can maybe pinpoint things before they happen, and to allow you to have a process to try and deal with this as well. So the LEAF comprises of a number of different areas. It asks questions around menstrual function, it asks questions around contraceptive use, potentially around injuries as well, how many days you've been training or absent from. And then it looks at GI function, because it has been seen that people do struggle sometimes with GI function as well. And what we're saying is that a risk of greater than 8 poses some risk to that athlete that has responded to that. So you will get your scores back in terms of where you sit on that, and you will also get some information around REDS, looking at maybe a roadmap of practitioners around the country that you can maybe start to get some professional advice for, and look to periodizing your intakes of nutrients and energy around your training program as well. And maybe that is certainly a good starting process for this as well. And really, one of the things that, as Danielle had done for her PhD, was this was used really to look at whether or not low energy availability was a risk for active females in Ireland. So we sent this questionnaire out a couple of years ago. Some of you may have completed it actually, and the idea was really to ask a range of different athletes. There was athletes from rugby, athletics, Gaelic games, basketball, the range of different sports. we had 900 applicant or questionnaires really. We didn't use 67 of them because some people actually didn't even meet the exercise recommendations, and that gives a sample of over 800, which is quite a good sample really, from a range of different sports as well. And really, there was a range of different abilities. We had 162 international athletes. We had 155 that competed at either provincial or county level. There was almost 300 that were competitive in their sport. And then there was over 200 that were recreational type athletes as well. So basically the results showed that of those 800 odd athletes, about 40% of them were at risk for low energy availability. So basically, compared to the 18 of you that completed this, we saw that about 44% of your group showed that there was a risk of low energy availability. So 8 out of 18 of those that completed this questionnaire got a risk score of greater than 8. So, you know, I think it's important for us to look at that in the context of the whole thing, and really to look at where there are areas maybe that you guys can look to improve on. And again, those that are at a higher level have a higher risk. So again, the better you are in your sport, the higher your risk is for low energy availability as well. And again, what I do have to, you know, it's important to remember is that I do think there are times that athletes can or do move into this, but I think being aware of it, dealing with it, and not letting it go for long periods of time is really, really important as well. And the problem is that this is where it starts to become a relative, you know, this is where the nuts and bolts of it is, that the injuries that are reported, and we're starting to see now that becomes really important, because this is going to affect your ability to train and be consistent in your training as well. And we're seeing stress fractures as being a major part of this as well. And again, from an athletics point of view, these are the ones that is going to significantly hamper your ability to train and perform as well. So this is, for me, this is interesting because we ask questions of the dietary patterns of those people that completed this, and 41% said that they followed some type of special diet. So some of, you know, slightly less than 50% followed a lower carbohydrate diet. Some people followed a paleo diet. Some people followed a gluten-free diet, and some people followed a dairy-free diet. Now, I think it's really important to remember is that if we have athletes that are following all of these or a couple of them, that can have a significant impact on your nutritional status. So, for example, we did say earlier that one of the best or easiest ways to get calcium into the diet is by consuming dairy. Okay, if you reduce dairy, you reduce your intake of calcium. You really do need to be on top of your game. If I was to tell you that from an Irish dietary point of view, one of the second or the second most important source of calcium is actually white bread or bread, because flour is fortified with calcium. So when you start to take out bread or wheat products because you're following a gluten-free diet, can you start to see now how that can impact your overall intakes of calcium? So the dietary patterns are really important there in terms of that. So again, when we start to take out certain groups of foods, we increase risk as well. So what are the conclusions? There's about a 40% risk, which is very similar to your group there as well in terms of low energy availability. Again, there is significant associations between the risk and those missing more than 22 days of training due to illness. And again, the risk and stress fractures is also a problem there as well. So that's why we've looked at the screening, but we are also going to offer some, you know, it's not just we've screened you, thanks very much. The idea is that gives you a jumping off platform to do something about this as well. So again, look for irregular periods. If you're getting sick or injured very frequently, you have to look at that. You're just not that unlucky. It's really, really important that we do look at that as well, and particularly those bony injuries as well. So really do think about that as well. You know, watch for the disordered eating patterns, because that can affect your overall intake. Again, watch that rapid weight loss or a low body weight, because that can have an impact. Difficulty sleeping, you know, if you're not eating enough to sustain the overall requirements for your body, it will have an effect on your sleep. There's no doubt about that as well. Sometimes moods change, and that can be due again to not enough carbohydrate or energy going in. And then if we start to see performances dipping and going below what you expect or what you should see, then these are things that you should really look out for as red flags as well. So again, I think from us is be cautious when you're interpreting some of the information that's coming out there, especially some of the social media driven stuff. I think again, you know, seek advice. You know, it would be important to get advice regarding your training and your nutritional requirements around that as well. And again, if your menstrual cycle is irregular or it has disappeared, that does require some investigation of some sort as well. Listen to your body. You know, you do have a menstrual cycle. Compared to males and men, you're very lucky, because that actually is telling you something. And I would see that as a really, really useful tool, because sometimes when we get menstrual function back to a normal period, if it jumps out a little bit, that kind of tells you that you know, that there's a mismatch there, and we can bring it back in again. And remember, really, and it's very interesting, because there's been a couple of reviews published actually this week, one particularly around the oral contraceptive pill, but again, it's not an appropriate treatment of REDS. A withdrawal bleed is not a period. It tells us nothing. And if we were to look at the profile of a female on the oral contraceptive pill compared to a female postmenopausal female, it's very hard to tell the difference from a female hormone point of view. So that's not great in terms of long-term bone health particularly. So just to finish off before people do go to sleep, I want to give you an example of an athlete, just in terms of you know, the weight sometimes isn't the enemy here as well. So this was a female runner that came to see me in clinic a couple of years ago. There was a couple of different things going on there, and again, it's one of the reasons why we do ask about gut health in terms of there. But there had been some issues around diarrhea, especially around hard training sessions and races, and then suddenly it had increased again. So again, she'd gone back to looking at she'd been injured at one point, so again we were looking at the injury was now better, but she wanted to try and sort out her gut health as well. So again, their menstrual cycle had always been irregular, but again there'd been a big gap recently, and also weight had dropped, and was concerned about that as well. So again, there was a lot of activity. I don't know why that has gone to that, but it's very important to look at these periods of time where there's training, but there's also non-training activity, which has to be accounted for in the big scheme of things as well. So remember, they need to be factored in there also. And also we need to look at, for example, within, let's say, a period of 24 hours, if we look at, why am I not seeing that full screen? Is that any better? Can people see that a wee bit better? If we look, let's say, for example, from Tuesday at 1 o'clock to Wednesday at 8 o'clock in the morning, we've got one hard session there at 1 o'clock, and we've got another long session there in the morning. So between 1 o'clock on a Tuesday and 8 o'clock on a Wednesday, we've got 2 sessions. Plus, we've also got a walk home from work and a 20-minute jog. So that is a massive cost in terms of your energy requirement for the week. and that will have a big impact on the rest of the week as well. So have a look at how your week pans out and how that can be, how you really fuel that period of time as well. So her weight did go up, and actually her period returned really very quickly. And once the second period had returned, she had decided to take a wee bit of time off, which did help that. Her weight went up, but she actually ran a PB relatively quickly after that, 4 or 5K. So weight didn't have an impact here. In fact, you know, she got a PB there. The pattern of eating was changed to around training, and we looked at foods that could be causing problems. So again, you know, some of these protein bars that are out there, they're really, you know, out there on social media. People see them as really healthy. Some of them I think are shockers. And some of these bars, that to allow them to say that they're sugar free, they add in so many other things that can be absolutely lethal for your guts. So again, look at what is healthy, or inverted commas, is suitable for you as well. The training load had now increased, so it's really important for us then to step up the intake again around that, and again making sure that there's calcium enriched foods there, because we were restricting lactose a little bit there as well. But you can use lactose free milks, they're available out there too. And using menstrual function as a monitor for her, as a red flag for energy availability, is a useful tool for this particular individual as well. So excuse me, just to finish off, I don't think food is the enemy. It can fuel you better, and more consistent performance can be achieved. Weight isn't the enemy either. Scales don't measure your muscle mass, and if you're not well fueled, then there'll be no muscle mass gains, and that will affect your strength, your speed, your endurance. When you match your energy requirements, there should be a bump in your weight. You should expect it, but then it should and probably will come back down again, because you'll be working harder. A race in weight is important, but you can't live at that the whole time. You have to look at it in the big context of the full year. Listen to the body cues. It is easier for you than males, but you need to be aware of the issues. And you really do need to look at that injury and sickness. You're just not that unlucky. It really is important to look at that as well. This does take time. It's not going to come today or tomorrow. And actually, sometimes the volume of food that you have to eat is actually huge, and that becomes it becomes a problem, because you just don't have the time in the day, and you do need to look at the volume of food as well. So that's why I'm saying we need to sometimes look at energy rich and smaller volumes as well. So this idea that there's clean, healthy, dirty, such and such foods, that's rubbish. There is no such thing, because it's all in context of you. Stress fractures are not healthy. So to be brutally honest, if that means you eating some, you know, cake or a scone or pancakes or Nutella versus, you know, a chia seed something or other, that is the most important thing that you can be doing. And really it is important that you have to look at from the inside out. You know, we can have people that, you know, look very healthy from the outside, but things are not right from the inside, and that's certainly from a bone health point of view as well. So thank you very much for your time, and I'm just wondering, do we have any questions?
I suppose, as you say, it's not that they actually have low energy availability. It's literally that there may be symptoms there associated with low energy availability, and it's really then following up and sitting down with a practitioner to see if, you know, that is low energy availability, or if there's some other issue there, maybe PCOS, or is there maybe some sort of intolerance, if there was GI dysfunctional issues. So it's not to scaremonger or to make people think that they have it straight away. It's more so that screening process and to follow up.
Yeah, very good. And as we said, we don't unfortunately have the resources to necessarily pay for you to go and see a nutritionist, but there will be a list there that you can of recommended nutritionists that you can follow up with. And if you have any questions about your score, you can email Danielle or Sharon when that comes through. I guess if no one else got a question, one question I had, I guess, from as a coach concerned with performance, you know, some of those stats there about the number of elite athletes that are showing signs of or risk of energy, poor energy availability, but you know, seemingly are good performing athletes. You might be forgiven. You know, you might think that the poor energy availability was a sign of that you were going to perform well. I think Sharon's example gave a little bit of a counter argument to that. But is there anything else you'd add to that?
Danielle, do you want to add anything?
I'm trying to think now. I think you covered majority of it. The only other thing what you've covered anyway, but with regards to performance, you know, that dip in performance, you'll probably see an increase in performance before you see that drop off. And like from the different type of qualitative stuff that I'm doing at the minute, it's that consistency in training, that it's not falling out of training due to minor injuries and illnesses, that they can get consistent, they're not missing days, and that's so important at that elite level, you know, because that's just time lost. And I think when you're at that higher level, that's so important. So doing the basics right and meeting something as simple as your overall energy intake and keeping you in training is far more important than trying to eat as Sharon says, as inverted commas, clean or as low energy dense as possible. Just because the nutrients there, you need the overall energy. So I think that's the key message. And sometimes that, you know, if there is a small energy deficit, you know, it can be rectified with something simple of making sure that you have your recovery snacks after your sessions. There could be a small deficit between 300 to 500 that you could make up with some milk, some fruit, and then following up with a dinner, or if it's your protein shake or a handful of nuts and seeds, that it doesn't have to be mountains and mountains of food. There is energy dense foods there that you can simply add into your current diet as well.
Yeah, good points. I think it's important to highlight. Often it is athletes can be doing well with the nutrition, and then they make a step up in performance, and then step up the training, and they don't always match. The nutrition doesn't always follow that. My experience of athletes that run into trouble is often it's around those times when they improve performance or increase training that they're most at risk, actually. So I think it was a good point Sharon raised around being more aware then.
And sometimes the difficulty with this is as well is that when you actually do make a jump in fueling, actually your performance will jump again and you'll work harder, and then you still have to, you know, it becomes almost like, it can become really tiresome because the volume of food is actually prohibitive. That becomes the difficulty. So don't think that we think this is easy. We don't. And I know when we see some of the numbers that we're looking at, you know, if you're trying to run with 4,000 to 5,000 calories on board, it's really very difficult. So we do get that it is a problem. But as Danielle said, it's looking, and I think, Danielle, there's that bit around the, you know, the gaps in the day is really important as well, isn't it?
Yeah, within day energy deficiency. And they've found that more that they could be overall than the day they could be meeting their energy requirements, but it's the timing of that as well as it's really important. So after sessions, so it's just doing the simple things right, the timing of your nutrition and getting the overall energy in. That'll be the two key nutrition points anyway going forward.
Sometimes it can be the fact that if people have GI issues around, let's say their runs or their training, they're less inclined sometimes as well to consume enough food to actually fuel what they're doing. So it can be a kind of a secondary relation there. And also sometimes it's because, you know, and then what happens is then they don't feel like eating anything, or they feel sick, or they feel bloated, so they're not able to consume the amount then that they need to do. And the difficulty is as well is that the gut, actually, the amount of there's a reduction in the amount of oxygen getting in there as well. So what happens is digestion and all becomes, you know, a little bit slower, and with nerves in there in terms of racing as well. And if people are worried about maybe, for example, having the runs, they're not going to want to take on board a huge amount of food as well, or they're feeling sick. So it's about looking at reducing the pressure on the gut. It may be that you reduce the amount of fibre that's going in around hard training sessions, and then moving to maybe more of a liquid based meal replacement might be easier as well, particularly if people are having some of those symptoms also.
And you're saying, Sharon, when athletes of poor energy availability, that the gut function can be worse, so it becomes cyclic?
It can be a bit of both. It can be there in the first place, or actually that can cause gut issues as well.
And I suppose it's a matter of using your training sessions to practice. So 2 to 3 hours before your session, trialing foods. And if it doesn't work for you, know, well, that food's definitely a no-go for me. If it's maybe a Weetabix or something that's a bit higher in fibre, maybe try a pancake or something 2 or 3 hours beforehand. It's a bit more palatable, but you're also getting the calories in. So I suppose it's trying to figure out what works for you, because the same food is just not going to be ideal for everyone.
And again, we have athletes that would, so for example, you know, by reducing the fibre, by reducing maybe some of the FODMAPs, particularly things like wheat, where that is a bigger effort on the gut to digest that and to work it through, you can actually then maybe have adaptations to how you eat around racing as well. So for example, we have athletes that are not celiac, but what we do is we reduce the amount of gluten going in, but it's not the gluten that's the issue, it's the wheat. So we may suggest to them that they would be better off consuming, let's say, gluten-free carbohydrate sources in and around the racing, rather than having normal. But that at other times they can have normal, if you see what I mean. And it may be that instead of having Weetabix or porridge or some of those that are, particularly some of the wheat-based cereals, that maybe some of the easier cereals on the gut, for want of a better word, like Rice Krispies or cornflakes, might be easier managed, period.
Okay, and I know in the past you've mentioned some of the recovery bars and things can be high in FODMAPs and can actually.
So they use the sugar alcohols or the polyols to make sure that they can say that it's sugar free, but those play absolute havoc with your guts, you know, so they will cause osmotic diarrhea. And again, a lot of people are consuming, you know, maybe that, or, you know, other things that would be, sometimes people use, say, sugar-free gum or sugar-free mints maybe around, and again, they would have a lot of those in it as well. So when you combine lots of different things up at once, you can end up with quite a lot of them there. Why do periods, what's the link between periods and energy availability?
So it's whenever you don't have enough energy or fuel in the system, the body's smart, so it's going to adapt. So it's going to shut down a system that is of less importance. So it's not going to shut down your, I suppose, your heart health or your immune function. The first system to go will be your reproductive function. And I suppose for a girl or a female, it's a really good indicator for us if there is an energy deficiency there, because it's a red flag and it's easily picked up by you. You'll know that yourself. But it's simply because it's of lesser importance than another bodily system. So it's the first one to go. And that's why it's interrelated with low energy availability.
Yeah, very good.